All right, y'all, welcome to Sacred Stories. We are here to listen and learn and to connect into the spiritual journey of some of our most kick-ass friends that also identify as athletes. And so it's my pleasure to be here today with Khortlan. Khortlan is a dear friend of mine from Vanderbilt Divinity School and now beyond. So welcome, Khortlan.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelsey. It's an honor to be invited to the Sacred Stories. And I'm just so excited to be in this space and share some of my stories. So,
Tell us about yourself. Who are you? What are you up to?
yeah. So, my name is Khortlan Becton. Before I got married, I was Cortland Patterson, and I'm from Houston, Texas. Right now, I'm living in Philadelphia, though. I just graduated from Temple Law School. As Kelsey mentioned, I was at Vanderbilt Divinity School before, so I lived in Nashville, Tennessee for a few years. I actually did my undergrad at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So like I've been kind of working my way up, up
Yeah.
north from Houston. Um, but I've been really involved in athletics. Like I've always been an athlete. I feel like my parents had me in like YMCA soccer and basketball. I tried gymnastics, but I wasn't very flexible, so that didn't last too long. But I would play like pickup football at recess with like my friends and stuff. I am a black belt in TaeKwonDo. I started early in I think like elementary school and worked until middle school. I played AAU track and also had the um, opportunity to go to the Junior Olympics. I placed 7th in discus, and I threw shot put as well, but didn't place in shot put. But yeah, so track was a part of my life for a while. I played volleyball, basketball, ultimate Frisbee. In undergrad, I tried to go out for the ultimate Frisbee, like women's club team. Didn't realize they traveled as much as they did and required like $300 to play, which was very real. I was really just trying to play kind of recreationally, and didn't realize it was that serious. So I didn't join the club team, but it was a super fun experience. And then now I just like weightlift and just try to compete with myself with that. So I have a long-standing history with athletics, and I'm still in athletic spaces. And so I love to kind of talk about athletics, watch athletes, and follow them. Yeah.
That's amazing. So you are an athlete through and through and so well-rounded. I just want to say to connect in, gymnastics also didn't go very well for me. I could not do a cartwheel. And so they were like, listen, kind of make or break. So I feel you.
They're pretty cutthroat. Like,
Yes.
I mean, power to them. It's like, hey, this isn't your strong suit, but
Mhm.
do well in what you do. And they just, yeah.
Absolutely. It just helped to deepen my respect for gymnasts because I was like,
100%.
at 6, I couldn't do it. So yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we had, girls were out there doing all types of stuff, and I was like, I don't even know how y'all begun to do this. Like, how do you even begin to know that you can do cartwheels and flips like this? Like,
Yeah.
that's not that adventurous, but I found my niche elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely like maybe naming one of the challenges of being an athlete. I'm curious,
Yeah.
throughout your career and all of your experiences as an athlete, what are some of the gifts and challenges that came up for you?
Yeah, I think some of the gifts is that, and I guess, do you mean like personal gifts or like
Yeah,
gifts
just
of
of being an
being an
athlete.
athlete?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the gifts that stood out to me was just like the gift of community and belonging. I think that is such an inherent part of being an athlete, is like being part of a team and like being part of something larger than yourself. And
Mm.
even if you're like in track or something where you're like an individual competitor, like you're still thinking about like your record or your times, and like there's something larger. So I think that it's always been like that athletics has given me a vehicle to like belong and create relationships, and through those relationships, like that kind of helps build character, like when you start to weather the storm and like when training happens and like hardships come, like you really rely on your teammates and you really rely on the relationships that you've built to like really get you through. And I feel like that's been one of the best gifts for me because just belonging has really mattered. I think it matters for everybody, but it mattered a lot for me growing up too. And that was one of the first things that came to mind as far as gifts go. It also like inducts you into a very special family that like really understands that like we got here through like blood, sweat, and tears. Like this is not just like a easy like, oh, let's just, you know, have friends and have fun. And like that's a huge part of athletics for sure. But there's also like very much like discipline and like we have to hold each other accountable, which is so genuine and beautiful. As far as like challenges, I think being held accountable and being comfortable being held accountable is a challenge too. Like especially when you're like a talented person or you're used to just like receiving praise from people, getting criticism, as constructive as it can be, like can still be challenging. Also like learning how to deal with defeat and like overcoming obstacles has also been like challenges, but I think that they can also be gifts too, that like really prepared me for later on in life. Like there's been a lot of other things that I've had to deal with in life, personal challenges, personal senses of defeat. And I really felt like some of the stuff that I learned on the court or on the field, like kind of helped me push through in those more like other personal things.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So, community, belonging, I might name it as grit, and just sort of
Yeah.
pushing through and maybe knowing your edges and
Mhm.
limitations and having to face those things. It's really a journey in and of itself. It's a very formative, we like to talk about formation in Christianity, especially. And at CAC, what does formation really mean? And it's like, well, being an athlete, being part of a team and something bigger than yourself, it's both calling out sort of the best in us and calling us out of ourselves too. It's kind of the both and of um, being empowered, in our own bodies and also being part of something outside of ourselves that's larger than our own kind of
Mhm.
individual experience. So really the celebration, I would say being an athlete, I think at its best is like celebration of the I and the we and the individual and the communal and that's
Yeah,
deeply theological stuff
for
if we
sure.
wanted to get into that.
Yeah.
um, and I love too that being an athlete, you know, on the spectrum of ability, however our bodies are showing up in the world,
Mhm.
if we're passionate about athletics, that it allows us to be in our bodies
Yeah.
and to be embodied in the world.
Mhm.
And something that you and I, which is also deeply theological, right? Like you and I
Yeah.
come out of Christian traditions. We
Yeah.
talk about the incarnation and sort of God manifest in body and in people in time and space. And so I'm curious, when we were kind of prepping for this, you mentioned wanting to talk a little bit about bodies and about body image.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious, like, what does body image mean to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think so much of, and one thing that is what was a struggle for me in being an athlete was having to deal with that personal sense of like body image and like how am I showing up in the world versus like how should I show up? And I
Mm,
think the should piece, which is so difficult for um, for anyone, but it was very difficult for me as a young Black woman of color. Like it was a lot to figure out how to show up, um, and especially when you are so much like pitted against ideal images, right? Like this is how you should look. And so for me, body image when I was younger was synonymous with body dysmorphia. Like when I was thinking about this question, one thing that like popped in my mind was like this little puberty book that my mom gave me when I was, you know, I don't know, like going through puberty, fifth,
mhm,
sixth grade or whatever.
mhm,
This is what changes to expect in your body type stuff. And there was like a image that I remember seeing of a young woman in front of the mirror, and like she was standing there just like looking like a normal kid, and then and she looked normal and healthy, and the reflection that was shown in the image was like her maybe like 150 pounds heavier and looking unhealthy and crying. And it just, and so it just like showed this image of body dysmorphia. Like she saw one thing, but in reality, she was actually very healthy, completely fine and complete. And so that's what body image kind of looked like for me early on. Like, I think that like going back now and looking at pictures of me as a kid, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I was cute, like I was completely fine. I looked healthy, I looked athletic, you know, I had an athletic build. But when I was growing up, I was taller than most of the people in my grade, stronger than most of the guys in my grade, which is not like normatively acceptable, I guess. And so like just dealing with that and getting older and realizing that like being in my body and like starting to grow from that will look like being more compassionate and not like comparing myself to what Teen Vogue says I should look like, or, you know, whatever other magazines there are out there said I should look like. And I also think that social media, I mean, just like how society has been going recently and just been expanding more and diversifying more, we see more images of athletes that aren't your stereotypical looking athlete. Like we have more diversity in athletics. We have, you know, transgender athletes. We have like different women athletes athletes of color, like, you know, like Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka. I mean, in athletes battling all types of mental challenges, like, you know, mental health issues. I mean, athletes are coming in so many different shapes and forms now that it's easier to be like, I can accept myself and like I can see myself showing up in an athletic space, you know, more so than we did back in the 90s and early 2000s. I feel like when I was growing up.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, that's really powerful, you know, to name, you know, that what I heard, you know, first of all, that you know, speaking of athletic form or athletic bodies, that we come in all shapes, sizes, expressions, colors, and that, you know, dominant society or dominant culture in a lot of ways has not it's done a terrible job of actually honoring that diversity, right, of body type and how we're showing up in flesh in the world and how we're showing up in different sizes too, you know. And so I love what you just shared. And, you know, my hope is that for all people and particularly athletes, that everyone would know that however your body is showing up and what health and wellness means and looks like for you is more than enough, you know. And to start letting go of some of these like idealized, iconized like images of what even athletic form is supposed to look like.
Right.
And if we had more time, we could kind of get into the roots of some of that. But that bottom line, and most importantly, like what I hear you saying, Khortlan, is, you know, your own sort of coming into embracing your body and yourself, you know, the liberation that comes with that and the goodness, like wanting that for the whole athletic community is really powerful.
For
So
sure.
I'm curious, you mentioned the word flourish, you know, what does it mean for you to flourish in your body?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it means and this is something that I'm still working on. Like, I don't think that you really fully arrive at a place where you're done with understanding how you show up in this world, because your context always change, your surroundings always change, and your body changes. So for me now, I mean, I think flourishing looks like understanding where I'm at, what my gifts are, what my weaknesses are, and not seeing them in a deficit type of way. I think I was very much like in a deficit mindset, like, oh, if I just like get a little slimmer here, or like if I don't work on my shoulders as much, then maybe like I could fit into, I don't know, like female clothes better, like, because they weren't really fitting us well early on. Like they just weren't fitting athletic body types well. And so instead of thinking from that type of mindset, I'm thinking more so now of like, oh, this is great. Like, this is an opportunity for me to maybe build on my legs more. Like, I can, stand it, do a couple more sets or like reps here, but like, it's more of an opportunity to grow instead of like, oh, like I need to hide this and be ashamed of this, or like maybe need to like work on this, but in a negative sense. Like, it's, I don't know how else to explain it, but I think that that's really what I'm focusing on now, is just understanding that I'm not perfect, and that's okay. And that's actually a great thing, because it makes me unique, and it explains and is the source of a lot of my gifts, is my uniqueness. So I think that just really appreciating that and trying to apply it every day is how I can flourish, and how I'm flourishing now.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good stuff too. And yeah, embracing imperfections as like a source of gifting and a source of authenticity too. Like that's really cool. I love that. I need to work on that. I'll put that in my back pocket too.
Yeah, we'll hold
Um,
each other accountable.
yeah, I love it. I love it. Um, so I'm so curious, Cortland. Over the years that I've gotten to be your friend and just sort of known you, you've always come across, with such compassion, but also confidence. You have such a grounded sense of self, and I'm curious, where do you source that confidence and your sense of self-esteem from? Where does that come from for you?
I think that, I mean, it goes back to the gift that I initially talked about with athletics. I think that that confidence and sense of self comes from realizing that I'm a part of a team, and I belong to a team, and that my teammates, like, and I create something, like together I'm a part of a creation. And I think that this is like a larger spiritual conversation and topic, which is like understanding that God has placed you at a specific place, a specific point in time, with the specific people that you're around, and the specific body that you have, with the specific gifts that you have, to serve a specific purpose. And like, once you really fully appreciate what that means and understand that like nothing is happenstance, you can't
Mm,
help but to show up in confidence and self-esteem, because like that's like everything is set for you. Like, the stage is really set
mm,
for you to do you, and to just to groove out, like, do you love on people, do what you want to do, be
mm,
authentic, and the space is there for you to do that. And so I think that I try to live by that. And the many times that I get anxious, and I get anxious like multiple times a day. so so like the many times that I get anxious about this, I always like feel better when I'm around people,
mm,
and I'm just like recognizing that everybody's showing up, and everybody has different gifts,
mm,
and like weaknesses and problems and anxieties, but also joys and like happiness that they're bringing to the table. And so like that's always been like a source of confidence for me. It's like being around other people. Like,
mm,
I remember going to volleyball tournaments or like track meets, and you see some like wacky stuff. Like, you see teams in all types of cool colors with like different headbands and like chants that you've never heard of but sound super cool. Like, everybody's like doing their own thing in their own little communities, and like you just can't help but be in awe of just like how beautiful I think athletics can be, and how beautiful like athletics are made by the people who make them, like by the athletes. Like, it's just a beautiful production, if you will. And I think that learning that I can be part of it, and am a valued part of it, that it being, the larger community, really gave me a sense of confidence and self-esteem that I still hold on to today, even though I am not a part of like like a team.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, that what I hear in that, for me, like in listening to you, and the invitation that I'm hearing is, how can we um, embrace our particularity and love our people?
Right.
So, how do you show up as you, like you were saying, and just embrace your particularity, embrace your context and your being in the world, and stay connected to community, and, love your people, because both matter. That's good stuff. I also love alliteration, so I remember things. So two P's. I'm like, I got that. I remember that, Cortland. That's great. Well, speaking of kind of particularity in people, you have such a cool history in your educational journey, and you've been to divinity school. You just graduated from law school. Can you share a bit of like why did you do those two things, and what were kind of some of the highs and lows, or whatever you feel like sharing about it?
Yeah, I mean, after that journey, I do have to sit back sometimes. I'm like, why did I do this? Why did I do this?
Yeah.
Um, I went to divinity school. I've studied religion in undergrad.
Mm.
I studied religion and African American studies, which was a very interesting, both very interesting fields, but had some very interesting intersections. Um, but in my religious studies program, I learned a lot about like what religion is, like the tenets that religions observe, the different holy books that religions have, and some of their histories. But I wanted to more so understand like how faith operated in society, like what is faith, and like how does it operate in society, like what is the substance of religion, and like I wanted to dive a little deeper. And also personally, I wanted to dig into what that meant for me as a Christian, because I was and still am on a journey. So once I got to divinity school, I realized that that was a very broad question. What is the substance of religion? And there's so many different, rabbit holes that you can get into to explore that. But Kelsey, one thing that that we shared was that our love for creativity and artistic expression in faith. And so that was really, I think, where I started to focus in on in divinity school. And I focused in on how people use artistic expression to like reclaim humanity and like fight injustice, which like dehumanize people on so many different levels in so many different ways. And so one thing, another aspect of my time at divinity school is that my partner Stephen at the time was going through law school, and so we would come home and have some really intense discussions and interesting conversations about like faith, American legal history, and like activism and humanity, and like just like some really interesting conversations about how do we start affecting change with like knowing about these different like systems and like things in place that influence human behavior. And so like through those discussions, I became more and more like interested in the law, and I understood that I needed to like know more about the law in some ways to get at how to make changes, I guess, in like a justice space. So I'm still kind of unsure about where my journey is going to lead me, but I feel like knowing a little bit more about the legal system and having skills about the legal system, I think I like have skills now where I understand where people get their values from. Like I understand very much like on a societal sense and a legal sense, like we don't steal because it's wrong, right? Like there's like some sense of like, what does justice look in a very legal and moral space? And then also like, what does justice look in a very like moralized and like Christian or just religious space? And like, how do we see the intersections of these? Like, how do we start to best affect change? So that's really what led me there. And that's kind of the space that I'm in now and some of the questions that I'm left with. And I'm excited to kind of untangle that and see what journey God has for me with the skills and knowledge that I have now.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how your journey continues to unfold. And, it's amazing work, Cortland, and you are a change maker, and you know that. And so I'm so excited to see how that continues to transpire for you. And a lot of folks, maybe some folks listening to this Instagram live, might be wondering, like your journey. You've had such a awesome journey so far, and you mentioned like you still have some questions, and you're still waiting to see kind of what's the next step. And so what's your wisdom for doing that listening and discernment? Some people might say following God's will, or maybe the heart, your own heartbeat, your own passion. But what's the wisdom for how you listen to what is how you make that decision for that next thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. Like I was trying to figure out how to get at this question, and I think I had like a couple of different ways. I think first of all, my brain does not work linear in a linear fashion, so like bear with me as I do address this question. But I think that that even goes to maybe how I start to address this. Is like I don't think
Mm,
linearly, which has really freed me to take unconventional paths that
mhm,
really speak more to like me and again like my specific context and my gifts and my community. Like I really have freed myself from you go to school, undergrad, you get a job, you do this, you do that,
mhm,
just like the ABCs of a success in life that we like are fed from early
mhm,
on.
mhm,
Um, so, but also on another point, I was thinking about 2 Corinthians 12:9 and 10.
mhm,
And like the New Living Translation says, each time he said, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I'm glad to boast about my weakness so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong." And I think that this is like really helpful to understand like your gifts and your weaknesses, not as like a deficit thing, but just like understand where you are, like just kind of take inventory of your gifts and your skills. And I think when you can do that, you can understand that like God even knows that like even more so. Like he knows not only your gifts and weaknesses, but like how you got there. And
mhm,
so in that way, God's like the ultimate coach. Like, you trust in your coaches know your abilities, they know your strengths, they know your weaknesses, they know your goals, right? And so you trust that your coach will then coach you to take the steps that you need to take to do that. And like God is like the ultimate coach. Like he's created everything, like knows everything, like literally is the best coach that you could have. So like leading into that and understanding that, like Kelsey, coaches can be crazy. Coaches, there's method to the madness, but like
yeah,
coaches can really be like, you were like, I
yeah,
don't understand how juggling 5 bottles of peanut butter and like, jumping up and down, but like, I don't understand what this method is. But
mm,
then when you win that championship, you're like, all right, there was something there. Like this coach knows what they're doing. I think really leaning into that and understanding that like God knows what's going on, knows what he wants to happen. And then like understanding that your gifts and weaknesses are in alignment with that plan can really help you kind of like lean in to listen to God's will. And then my last little
mhm,
point too is that like um just like growing up, I've always been like a counterculture person. Like I didn't like the color pink. I didn't like cheerleaders. Like I mean, and no offense to cheerleaders. I think what they do is amazing, and like what cheerleaders can accomplish like is great. Like it's a wonderful sport and very competitive. But like because it was what was normative in my mind, I was like, that's not what like I want to go taekwondo. Like you know what I'm saying? Like I want to do like what most girls aren't doing right now. And that kind of fits in alignment with, I think, a other spiritual principle. I'm not saying that I was always correct to do, but
sure,
I think that when God says, like, look for the narrow path, I've always
mm,
been very, like, skeptical of the wide path, like the one
mm,
size fits all. Like, you just do this 30-day training, and now, like, you can, I don't know, like, long jump. I don't know. But it's like you can't I've always been skeptical of that. And so I think that can help too in just understanding that your path won't look like everybody else's, and that's a good thing. Like that's definitely a good thing. When you listen to athletes and accomplished like Olympians, like their paths like looked like literally almost incomprehensible. Like you just don't even understand sometimes how they got to the way that they like got like where they got, how they trained. You don't really understand, but they're comfortable in their lane and their abilities, and it led them to where they ended up going. And so that's kind of the 3-part way that I approach this question.
yeah,
Yeah. And so, oh, I also had a point that I wrote down
Yeah.
um, about self-compassion here too. And I think that like
Mm.
self-compassion very much is understanding your gifts and weaknesses. Like that's what I've basically been saying and like dancing around is just a larger idea of self-compassion. And I think when you start to realize that self-compassion isn't selfish, it like helps your team, right? Like it helps you help your team to understand your gifts and understand your weaknesses and understand to best like how to support everybody else using those things.
That's wonderful. So, the society tells us that the journey kind of goes this, it does this like linear thing.
Yep.
But like what I hear you saying is like it's more kind of like this like loop-de-loop creative
Yeah.
process to stay open to it. And then yeah, self-compassion. I mean, that's the heart of also integration of saying, I have gifts, I have edges, I have weaknesses, I have limitations, and like all of those things make up who I am, and I am forever evolving. Just like in sport, like we're always evolving.
Yeah.
And as Christians, I heard someone say once, we're always becoming Christian. I think it was Kelly Brown Douglas who said, we're always becoming Christians. We're always evolving. Which like the the fancy theological term, is the process of sanctification. Like we're always being sort of worked on. And I
Right.
love the concept of God as coach. um and that we can trust, if we've had good coaches, we maybe have had harmful coaches that have
Yeah.
caused abuse and trauma to us, to name that
Sure.
too.
For
And
sure.
we've also potentially, hopefully, had really life-giving coaches, and that God as lover and liberator and life giver is that kind of image of coach that
Mhm.
wants to accompany us, that wants us to be our best selves, is gonna ask us to maybe do kind of weird things, like you said, that don't make sense in the moment, but end up shaking out, but that are for us and with
Right.
us. And
Right.
so
That aren't harmful.
I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Because I was thinking about like, and I think this is something for perhaps later discussion, but like how do you discern harmful coaches? And there are
mm,
like a plethora of coaches who abuse their power. And like we know that God would never do that with us, but humans fall short of that. And that is something that I thought about. And again, I think this is maybe a later discussion,
yeah,
but like what happens when your coach isn't in your corner
that's
and
right.
how do you deal with that? But thankfully that's something that you don't have to worry about with God, and that's why God is the best coach and the ultimate coach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Amen to that, Cortland. That's great. So before we close with rapid fire questions,
Yeah.
any kind of words of wisdom or anything else you want to name or share with us?
Sure. Yeah, I think that like going forward, it doesn't help anybody really to underestimate yourself, and that's something that I've had to appreciate and still working on for myself, right? Like it doesn't help anybody. I used to think that it would save me if I didn't push myself on this mile so that I wasn't like gasping for breath and possibly about to pass out at the end of the mile. But no, that's not how you get stronger, right? Like you have to
Mhm.
push yourself to reach your limitations to then get past those limitations. But if you underestimate how much you can do, like you're never going to get strong. And then so like kind of like funnily, I was like, oh, I guess like if you underestimate yourself, it might help your opponent, right? But I think even then, it's a disservice to your opponent too, because you're not even showing up in a very like fair way. Like your opponent can't even gauge like their skills because you're not showing up at your best. So like you're really not helping, literally you're not helping anybody by underestimating yourself, which I think underscores my larger point, which is like I really hope that everyone who tunes in really like loves on themselves to like
Mhm.
understand their gifts and weaknesses, so that then they can't, once you get a sense and confront your gifts and weaknesses, I think that you can understand like your strengths and really understand like how much you can push and the extent to which you can push, and surround yourself with people who can then push you, because again, it doesn't help to underestimate. And I don't think that we really are showing up in the fullness of God, of the fullness of who God wants us to be when we underestimate ourselves. And then, so yeah, that was one of my last points of wisdom.
I love that. I love that. And yeah, please save this Instagram live and go back and listen to Khortlan's wisdom and her encouragement. When, especially for, when there's sunshiny days, but also when there's rainy days too, you're not alone in it. And, CAC is always here too if you need someone to reach out through social media. So please reach out.
Of course.
And so, Khortlan, we'll close our time together. I think you brought up a few future conversations I hope we can have at some point.
Yeah.
So we'll do rapid fire questions, and I just want to name, I sort of picked up this fun practice from the Way Brene Brown podcasts and in her interviews in conversations with folks, and I just think it's really fun. So Brene, she's a fellow Episcopalian as I am. Thank you for this. All right, Khortlan. So this is just intuition or instinct. Okay. So,
Okay.
Favorite musician or band?
A couple of come to mind. So like Cook and Soul, Ari Lennox, Young Dolph. So yeah, those are like on the top of my playlist right now.
Awesome. Best book recently?
A Burning by Megda Majumdar. I'm sorry, I don't know if that's how to pronounce her name, but it's
Sure.
a wonderful fiction novel about justice. Great novel.
Amazing. I'll check it out. Pet peeve?
I can't, when people like downplay themselves or like talk up their flaws and they think that it makes you feel better. I just don't like, I don't know how to respond to that when people are like down on themselves. So
yeah. Favorite way to rest?
I've been listening to an Exhale app. It's called Exhale, and it has meditations and like different rests and stuff. And I play video games. I also just like to be outside. So those three things, great ways to rest for me.
Awesome. Okay, so the last two are fill in the blank.
Okay.
So being a Christian is?
Being a Christian is clutch. I mean, being from Houston, like, clutch city, but like really being like, God is so clutch, like literally in every single moment, especially in the moments when you really need him, like God shows through. And so being a Christian is very clutch.
Love it. All right, last one. Being an athlete is?
Okay, and I wrote this one, so this is like a little bit less like off the cuff, but I felt like it spoke to me a lot, and it was kind of poetic. So I was like, let me share this. Okay, I said being an athlete is more failure than glory, more band-aids than trophies, and more about your training than your talent. So I think, yeah, that's it. I mean, this has been awesome. So much. Thanks so much, Kelsey.
Thank you. And yeah, Khortlan, thank you so much. I say amen, and we'll see you again soon.
All right.